of owning a cafe and other heroic deeds by Beware the Tistero. Chapter 82. Reforming the Reformation Project. Weren't Sundays supposed to be days of rest? You want us to be nice to the people who bring sent here to spy on us. Sighing. Some days he really regretted being so logical. Shouta nodded, his body leaning against his service bar as the cafe community in various states of annoyance regarded him from where they sat or stood. Keiji's form, like a rock, a comforting presence at his side. I know that it won't be easy, he assured many of them angrily munching at their cupcakes. Matsuri and his protégés having left a handful of minutes ago, the unexpected visit having left a sour taste in their mouths. Just remember that those two aren't at fault here. The HPSC oversee a great many things, including hero licenses. So keeping tabs on them in turn can't be a bad thing. He reasoned, the most rational approach here is to welcome those hero trainees so that we can help them, and I can help the study group before you guys apply for hero courses, he said. At a few nods, and Denki throwing him a thumbs up, he took a sip of his coffee and continued. I'll also be making Nezu-san aware that Matsuri is creeping around and trying to poach his potential students. He grinned, the local bro sniggering. I have a sneaking suspicion our soon-to-be principal won't be too thrilled about that. He furthered with a mild shrug. But please, in the meantime, guys, try your best not to think of Hoxton twice being here as a hostile thing. He urged, his smile softening. And another life. I could have been part of the Reformation Project, and full disclosure, those two will be living lives you'd expect to see in a military academy. He huffed. God, what a different kind of life that would have been. He couldn't imagine growing up without his brothers, his life regimented and ordered by people who only saw him as a thing. He'd take dealing with a drunk Itsu and getting by in the care center any day as opposed to that. Considering Matsuri, having approached him, perhaps twice in Hawks, had come from similar circumstances. Having no family would certainly explain how the older of the two had ended up in Shigaraki's clutches, wouldn't it? Plus, like so many of us, they probably don't have access to their birth parents or biological families, which means that they'll need our help and support, doesn't it? He reminded, his teen's ire slightly deflating how even Darby seemed a little less prickly, whilst his dad similarly became thoughtful. So, what you're saying is, Katsuki called from where he was sat with his mother, Mitsuki's fingers busily texting someone as she tried not to scowl. We should do a double agent thing. He surmised, his friends all looked at him. I got them on our side before we all flip that old crusty man the middle finger. Blinking and laughing, rippling around the room, Obero ruffled the blonde spiky air whilst the study group cheered, and his other little brothers huffed, chuckled, and finally rolled their eyes while Spinner, growing just as excited as Izuku, slapped his left fist into his right palm. Oh yeah, Kachan's right. I mean, our League of Cafe versus the government? I don't like their ads, he called, his Ashi nodding at his side, whilst Omura adopted a look which suggested he was deep in thought before he started talking to his partner, Seiji, and the twins. Oh, no, this was getting out of hand. Helping two strangers out was one thing, but with so many intelligent, talented people putting their heads together, he couldn't have them breaking the law. Even though the police force officers, all on their phones, were eerily silent. We're not trying to overthrow the government, he sighed, his head shaking. We're not going to do anything that could jeopardize your futures, all right? Of course we're not. Naoki nodded sagely, his hands rising in an open-palmed shrug. We're just going to start dismantling a part of a clearly corrupt system going after vulnerable people, he mused. I'm down for that, he told the room, way too many of them nodding and reaching for their phones. Ugh. He probably should have been concerned when Nomori and Tomoko started giggling too, shouldn't he? Shit! Looking to the law enforcers, his expression hopeful. Maybe he could derail the machinations he could see building. It wasn't as though he was against righting wrongs, and if he was the only one taking action, as long as he knew that Hitoshi and his other wards would be okay, he'd be all for it. He wouldn't allow any of his precious people to get in trouble, and he was sure beyond a shadow of a doubt that the officers would feel that... Hey, Sugarame-san, they'll probably need some help with this, won't they? Feeling his gaze snap towards Sansa, their officially unofficial mascot purring a little as he grinned, Shouta could not believe what he was hearing. That's not... He tried his head shaking at the man from where he and a grinning Manza were sat in Dabi's preferred booth. A beaming Izuku and Itoshi sat with them alongside a chuckling Ingo. Yes, and I believe that formally investigating the practices of people who feel as though they're above the law is certainly warranted, the beagle-headed man replied calmly, his response causing him to balk. Now what had he gone and gotten them all involved with? And we'd be much obliged to all of you for assisting in garnering the trust of those two trainees, he added to the room at large. Their testimonial would be incredibly valuable evidence. He stated with a firm nod, his eyes looking to his own protégés who smiled at him. Sukoji, Tabakawa, it looks as though your Aizawa-sensei has even helped you to create this special assignment you'll need to complete for the next step of your promotions. He furthered his grin roguish as the young officers preened, and he looked at them owlishly. I would also like to have your formal testimony, Shouta-kun, the lieutenant stated, his face becoming serious. Concerned? It may have been many years ago. However, from what I could tell during your exchange with that man, you were approached by him without due legal representation, yes? Yes. That's right. He nodded. It was 3 days after my parents were killed. I was due to be placed in my first foster home the next day. He continued thoughtfully, his mind casting back to that meeting. He'd just been left alone with Matsuri in a room at Musutafu's social services office, hadn't he? I hadn't really stopped to think about him, or that he and his cronies were still operating in such a way. He huffed, his arms folding as he scowled lightly. Slowly, starkly, it hit him. Matsuri had come from his boys today. He'd come to take them off to a facility somewhere. And sure, kidnapping wasn't something that him and his organization had stooped to, but regardless of them allegedly being a commission set up for the public interest, this was beyond shady, wasn't it? And something needed to be done. He needed to safeguard his kids and any other children who could fall foul to Matsuri and his well-meaning schemes, didn't he? Well, that was that then, wasn't it? In all good conscience. He breathed, his expression determined. If there was anything I could do to stop this from continuing, Kenji-san, then I'll support you all the way. He stated, his smile returning as Itoshi and Aijira rushed to hug his legs, the sharp-toothed boy a little teary-eyed as he gently ruffled their hair. Such good kids. Ochako called jubilantly, the other tats cheering. I will make Hoxie and Twice-Knee feel so welcome that they'll be spilling all the beans in no time. The rest of the day was blessedly normal. Are you sure you don't want me to see you off at the train station? He'd said goodbye to the police force officers, and he'd given them a box of scones for the road. The tots and teens had continued with their lesson, and then, like always, every one of them had made their way home, either together or with the local pros as escorts. Izuku, too, had headed out with Katsuki and their mothers. The women, and it was about time, were going to go out for afternoon tea, whilst Bakugo Matsuharu looked after the boys, which was sweet. He hoped that they all had a great time. In the meantime, Denki had asked to keep Hitoshi company for the rest of the day, and seeing them both fawning all over his ward's Captain V manga, he'd proposed that the blonde sleep over, which had gone down really well, and after texting Koji-san, the boy's father had said it was fine. He'd come by for him tomorrow and dropped off a bag of pajamas and other essentials later on that evening. What? And that was all blubbering like babies in front of the tourists? Hard pass, Azamani. Spinner had stayed too. He wanted to join the adult self-defense classes later and had persuaded Dabi and Tomura to join him. So long as you're sure. Then, at 1400, the taxi he'd ordered to ferry his care center siblings back to their respective homes had pulled up. Tadeo had hugged him tightly along with Seiji. Naoki, similarly, had held him tightly, whilst Takeo had waited until the last minute to grab him. The others already sat in the car and ready to go. You take care of yourself, you hear me? Because I don't care if I have to walk you from Kyoto. If you need your ass kicking for ignoring your own needs, then I'll do it, you know? Returning the squeeze, they soon parted, and he ruffled that unruly mop of auburn hair.
I promise that I will, okay?
He smiled.
And I'll see you in Tokyo for the dance exam in 3 weeks' time, alright?
Having watched them go, he waved at the taxi and turned to go back inside. Shoni, don't be sad! Only to find 2 of his tots racing to his legs, both of them clutching their static shock plushies before offering them to him.
How could I be sad when you 2 were here,
Chuckling, he'd scooped the boys up and carried them back inside, both of them telling him silly jokes as Dobby held the door open, just as the clouds so humidly looming overhead finally decided to shed their load, the hot cement almost steaming in its wake. Pathetic fallacy, it seemed, was something that could occur in real life, too. The afternoon saw him plowing through his prep work and texting Nezu, whom, if the mysterious message he received back was anything to go by, had already been told about this morning's encounter. Nezu, please put any concerns you have about Matsuri to rest, Shotokun, and thank you for bringing this matter to my attention. He typed. He'll not be bothering you or your wards again. You have my word. It had been comforting, in some ways, and moderately terrifying in others. Sure, he knew that the man would be well connected, and since UA's most prominent courses were hero-based, he probably had a great deal to do with the HPSC. But there was just something about the finality to it all. He'd been unable to get in touch with Toshinori or Marai either. However, choosing not to dwell on it, he checked on his teens and tots before preparing for his adult classes. Then the adults taught, he'd walked from the yoga studio with his teens, and Shirakumo Oboro, his good mischievous, as he floated down the road with Denki and Dotoshi riding their own nimbus. Spinner, too, his form ecstatic, was having a ride on his own puffy white vehicle, his phone taking numerous selfies, whilst Dabi and Dumra, their eyes fondly rolling, recorded him having his fun. Fun that luckily wasn't happening in the rain, for just as he was rooting around the storage for a normal-sized umbrella, the clouds had parted and the sun had dried up any remnants of the water which had powdered for the majority of the afternoon. Not that he cared particularly about getting soaked when he got to spend time with a dear friend. However, he couldn't argue that spending time outdoors under an azure sky was superior to running around in stormy weather. The humidity had died back, too, thank goodness, even though there were still spludges of fluffy clouds dotting the sky. And speaking of clouds,
where are we heading?
He asked the sun-kissed man, those gleeful eyes locking with him as they neared their eatery.
Do you want something to eat before we go?
Well, I can't turn down your food, Shu, he replied fondly, his brows wagging playfully. And as for where we're going, well, he drawled, his right eye winking at Denki and Dotoshi as they passed him with a giggle. It wouldn't be a surprise if I told you now, would it? Ruefully rolling his eyes, Shouta snickered a little.
No, I guess not,
he mused.
Okay, guys, let's get inside,
he called when Spinner and his oldest wards continued to laugh as the green-skinned teen finally leapt off of the Nimbus to perform a superhero landing. Chuckling, he and the others offering up applause, he then ushered them all inside and began taking food orders for them, his spirit light and mood fully recovered since the events of that morning. A morning, not that he knew it at the time, which had put a very hot spotlight onto practices that many people had been blissfully unaware of, that many people were going to be very concerned about. People like Yagi Toshinori, Sasaki Mirai, and Nezu, whom, in the span of just a few hours, had assembled their lawyers, stakeholders, and the top 10 pros currently in the country for a meeting that Matsuri-kon and his associates had found really rather jarring. They'd found being fired with immediate effect pretty shocking, too. Not as shocking as when the police force showed up, however. Getting slapped with handcuffs probably wasn't how all 7 of Project Reformation's overseers had expected their Sunday to end, either.